Our most popular episode to date is our Business Model Canvas podcast. We briefly covered each of the 9 building blocks of the Business Model Canvas in that podcast. In response to many requests from our audience, we are providing 9 podcast episodes addressing each building block separately in greater depth. The Business Model Canvas, developed by Alexander Osterwalder, is a template often used to develop ideas and a monetization strategy for a startup venture. This episode is the 4th of 9 and will cover value propositions.
Our Favorite Tools for Entrepreneurs podcast addresses tools and concepts that are useful for the launch and growth of entrepreneurial ventures. Your 2 hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Professor Palin. How are you?
Doing very well. How are you doing today?
Fantastically. We've come together to discuss the 4th section of the Business Model Canvas, and it's the value propositions. When I think of value propositions, the big thing for me is the why. What value are you providing to the customer? What are we delivering to the customer? What problem are we helping solve? What bundles of services are we addressing? That's where my brain goes. Does something stand out for you?
I agree with you 100%. When I think of just the term value proposition, when you're pitching to an investor, that is the one thing you absolutely must cover and answer, what is my value proposition? So what unique benefits or value are you providing to your customer?
Right. The distinguisher.
And it has to be a distinguishing factor from the competition, because otherwise you just get into a shin kicking contest. I have to say that very slowly. And with a shin kicking contest where everyone else is doing the same thing, even if you win, it hurts like hell.
I'm sure that's the PG-13 version of what that could be.
Repeating what everyone else is doing is just a very, very painful path. The value proposition has to be some type of unique proposition to your target market.
Right. When I'm walking through this with companies I'm consulting with, often I couple this section with a pain point exercise. So trying to identify that individual, single, clearly outlined pain point that you are addressing. And that helps inform a lot of this discussion, whether it's a widget that makes turning the sink on and off easier, or what is the difficulty in life you're solving.
Well, I had mentioned previously in a previous podcast, the rule of 7. Basically, when you have a differentiation point, you don't want it to just be incremental, slightly better. You want to have a major jump in some component. It could be a quality component. It could be a convenience component. So there has to be some major distinction to truly separate yourself from the customers.
Yeah, I like that, because a small amount isn't going to be enough. You don't want to educate on that small thing. You really want it to be apparent.
Well, especially if you're dealing in a B2B market, the person buying is flooded with many decisions. And if it's just an incremental jump, it's easier for them to stay with the current business they're dealing with. So you have to give them a substantial reason. Why should they move to you?
Yep. The other thing I like to point out is on the business model canvas, each of the rectangles are different sizes, and value proposition, when I'm going through it, typically people write very concisely. We could ask the original creator, it's that large for a reason. The more you put here, the more you're actually informing the rest of the business model canvas, and the better results you're going to get and drawbacks between the rectangles across the board. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. We say they're all important, and they are all important. But if I had to put a top priority, this would be at least number 2, if not number 1.
Right. It's also a reason it's right in the middle of the board. It's where your eyes go immediately.
In a value proposition, has to be clear to the consumers. You want to make it concise, and it has to be easily communicated, which makes it much more complicated to do that, to get something that's complex and consolidated. Before we started this discussion, we just had a very similar conversation about our own venture.
That's exactly right. We did. For all the marketing people out there as well, this is a good opportunity to look at personas, buying personas. Every time we're going through the business model canvas, if there's a marketing person in the room, they want to put the personas all across the board. This is really where they live.
And to follow up with the conversation I had, one of the questions that I had for you is, how can we frame this in 25 words or less?
Yeah.
And that's difficult.
It is. No matter how simplistic of a business it is, 25 words or less is a difficult exercise. People want to extrapolate or educate and make it more complicated than it is. So when you work it down that low, what is the simplistic message that anybody can understand?
I use the grandma litmus test. Can I explain it so that grandma will understand what I'm talking about, even if it's a technology?
I often hear kindergartner, but grandmother works exactly the same way.
Well, when I look at the kindergartens and how they flip around on smartphones and the various apps, if you want simplicity, I would still go to grandma.
That's funny. No, I like that a lot.
So what are some examples that you can think of, types of value propositions that successful businesses have used?
Going back to the pain points, the big value propositions are things in daily life that make your life easier. Anything that's creating tension in your life, if you can figure out a way to alleviate that, that's a really clear value proposition. I try and stay away from cheaper being your value proposition, because in my experience, cheaper doesn't equate to the best results on the end. I tend to, on that triangle, higher quality or faster are the two, if you think of cost, time, and quality as the triangle.
Yeah, the word cheaper makes me cringe whenever my students use it, because it has two meanings. Most people are interpreting a lower price, but it also can mean a poor quality.
Right.
And what I've seen people will pitch, and I think this is very unrealistic. They will say, we're going to have the highest quality, the best service, and the cheapest price.
Right.
And I always say, how and why?
The idiom of if it's faster and cheaper, it's going to be lower quality. If it's lower quality and cheaper, it's going to be slow. And there's a third one in there somewhere. It really has rung true in my experience in the business world.
So I would say be focused. So if you want quality, that's great, but you can combine it, say, with convenience. So quality and convenience can be a nice blend for a value proposition. When I think of convenience, I think of Amazon.
Yeah, sure. Try and beat Amazon delivery, right? It's free and fast.
And it's so convenient.
Exactly.
Customer service can be a value proposition, having a higher level of customer service. And if you are in a market where everyone is beating each other over low price, you can create a niche for people that are willing to pay for customer service.
Yeah, provide that white glove feeling, the concierge feeling.
Innovation could be another value proposition.
Especially when it's sustained innovation. You're continuing to be on the forefront. It's not just one endeavor to put a piece of technology or a service out in the market.
Again, offline, we've had a lot of conversations about Chat GPT.
Right.
And that's obviously an innovation. That's a value proposition that's gotten a lot of people's attention in the marketplace.
The whole AI machine learning marketplace is rapidly adopting. We're trying to leverage multiple AI tools to support our growing business personally, and also the branding efforts we're putting out from it.
And that just touches overall into disruptive technology. If you're in the forefront, that can be a value proposition.
You just have to stay there.
It's a fast moving train, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is.
So are there any other issues with value proposition that you'd like to touch before we wrap up the conversation?
I would just say this is one of the first rectangles I start with, because it does have so many tie-ins to other rectangles across the business model canvas. We're going across the business model canvas from left to right, but feel free to jump around and make those connections to it, because the end result of the business model canvas is really what we're striving for.
Absolutely. And bottom line is, if you're not providing value to the target market, you don't have a viable business.
There we go. That's certainly true, isn't it?
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Ryan.
Yep. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to our Favorite Tools for Entrepreneurs podcast. As always, you can head over to ProfSpirit.com to check out more resources and courses designed for you, the entrepreneur. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and others to get the most up-to-date information as it is released.